How's everybody doing? Everybody, I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. Anybody learn anything new today? Anything interesting? Everybody having a good time? Good stuff. Cool. So we're going to talk SVG filters, CSS filters, blend modes. Anybody ever use CSS filters? Played around with it at all? Or is this all completely new? Completely new. Yeah, sort of played around with that, with IE filters, but just the concept of playing with SVG. Anyone played with SVG at all? All right, SVG filters. All right, cool. Blend modes. That's a big open end. It could be anything, right? All right, so I'm not going to use my remote. Having some weird technical issues, but that's all right. Let's get this going. So I don't know about you, but I find every day there's new stuff, and there's just new features that are available in this browser, and now I can do this, and oh, there's SVG filters and CSS custom filters, and every day I think I know, and then I see other new things that I'm like, I didn't know you could do that with your browser. And so we're going to talk about one of those, hopefully new things that hopefully you walk away going, this is cool, I got to play with this. And not all of what I'm going to show you is supported everywhere. You know, some of it's just on this browser and this browser, but it's evolving. Even today, with the announcement of Mavericks, some of this stuff is now available on Safari that wasn't available on Safari yesterday. So I'm going to show you a lot of really cool stuff, a little fun graphical effects, and I just want to leave you with this feeling of, just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? We've all seen some really bad, I was going to start picking some bad old Flash sites, and there's no end of some early on bad sites, and I thought, well, I could bring up the site and find out that the designer's here in the audience, and so I don't want to offend anybody. But I think it's just really important that you tell a story, that sometimes that you use these graphics effects, and try to think up, as you're looking at some of these effects, how could I use that to add value and to tell a story, and that it's not just woo, cool stuff. But so one of the things I say is sometimes it's not just for doing effects for getting attention, but sometimes it's for removing attention. And now we're all going to say a little prayer, yes, to the network gods. We'll see how that goes. So anyone ever heard of Edge Animate? It's Adobe, part of the Adobe Creative Cloud. It's an HTML JavaScript animation tool. This was built in that tool. And it's just a photo gallery, but it's kind of a nice little effect there, where just kind of blurring out everything that I don't want. So I'm using these, and it's all done with CSS. Just turn on CSS blur effects. And so it's just a nice little effect. It's not in your face, flashing crazy, but very useful. And as I say, it's not enough just to do this cool stuff, but tell a story. And I really would love to see some of you use some of this stuff and come back with some good use cases that we hadn't thought of. So this is an application that we worked on with National Geographic. I'm just going to give you an idea of some of the interesting effects, and some of them are so subtle I forget they're there as I'm looking at the site. This is some new web standards for wrapping text around shapes and stuff that you just normally can't really do. But you'll notice how when images come on the screen, they're actually kind of faded out in black and white. They come on the screen, they get colored. And this is another subtle, not special effect, but this is text balancing. I don't want to get off topic here, but if you ever think about centering text on a web page, it doesn't normally do that. It goes to the end of the page, and then it wraps one word and two words. And so it's a new standard we're proposing where you just say, just make it balanced, just do it. Because doing that in JavaScript, well, you couldn't just do it in CSS, but just doing that in JavaScript and figuring out text sizes and everything would be a nightmare. So, but notice that just slowly comes in, black and white to color, shaping the text. And they really wanted to give an idea of how enormous these trees are. There's this whole article on this giant sequoias. So we got this. I always get a little nauseous when I look at this. Can you guys hear me all right at the back? I'm talking all right? And this was done with WebGL. But if we go here, we can, so there's some pretty amazing things you can do just to tell the story. So HTML Canvas lets you program, do some, break normal boundaries of your web page. So one of the things we can do with a canvas is you're drawing, but I want to be able to do things. Anybody use Photoshop ever? All right. So let's just head over to Photoshop for a second. So here's an image, and I can get my brush tool. I can pick a color, and am I in normal mode? Yeah, and I can just paint on my image, right? But what I really want to do is change the blend mode to do things like, for instance, set the color, where I'm using the lighting of the existing image, but I want to use the color and color this in, right? So now I can do some interesting things and light up this tower, and there's a whole mess of different. Did I use the right one? Yeah. Multiply, right? And so I want my colors to actually interact with the existing image that's there. So there's a whole list of these blend modes, and we said, okay, we're Adobe, we can do this stuff, we have a good understanding. Let's take that to the web, because designers should be able to do that through just simple CSS. Just set the blend mode when you're doing stuff. Or in the case of canvases, when you're drawing, set the blend mode. So let's just head over here. All right, so we got blend modes. And I'm bringing up blend modes at the beginning because they actually have applications in all the other SVG filters and custom filters, and you're going to see. So this is on a canvas when you're drawing. If you're doing, anyone ever do any canvas programming here at all? A little bit. So when you're drawing on a canvas and writing some JavaScript, you can set the blend mode to any of these. And I gave a little bit of a description of what, hopefully, some of them are, you just have to use them to get a feel for what they do. But this is the code behind it that normally if you're doing canvas programming, you just get a context. You would set the fill style. Ignore that second line for a sec. Say it's blue and draw a blue circle. Great. But now you can set where you could always set the global composite operation, which is for compositing. So when you have two things on the screen and you're overlaying them, which one should be shown? Which one? The one in front, the one in back, where they intersect. And that's compositing. But now it's been extended to also say, when I'm drawing this over this, I actually want to blend the colors together. Not using normal, just the alpha channel that I just want to make this transparent, but I actually want to multiply the colors or do everything that I could do in Photoshop, but do it on the web. And so we can look at this example. Excellent. Okay, so here's the same image in a web page. All I did is I drawn the image into the canvas. I can set my blend mode to any of these guys. Let's pick, I don't know, fuchsia and color. And I have that working right? Yep, there we go. And sometimes with the resolution, I gotta just, there we go. Oh, okay, so aqua. But looks a lot like what we were doing in Photoshop, except I'm doing this in a web page. All right, and I can pick different colors. And, I don't know, maroon color. Right. And so now I'm coloring with red, but I'm blending using the color operation just like I did in Photoshop, but doing it now in a web page. Coming back to what I was saying at the beginning. I'm not saying how to use that, but there's a lot of great possibilities, a lot of great use cases where you could think of, and this is where I want you to come back and go, hey, saw your talk, came up with this great example, really great use case, we're using it on this site, whatever. I'd love to hear that. So this example, here we go. All right, it's just animating, and you can just pick different blend modes, right? Lighten it, do some color burns, and sort of interacting a little bit with the mouse. So you can definitely do some fun stuff here. All right. So this is where this canvas blend mode, there's another broader spec for just general blend modes, but specifically canvas blend modes. Supported on iOS 7 Safari. As of today, it's on Mavericks, so Safari on your desktop. WebKit Nightly, Firefox, Chrome Stable, and Opera. It's enabled. It's there, but it's disabled by default. And so if you want to play around with it, you have to go into Chrome flags and enable experimental web platform features, or you could just go to that link, which will take you right to the that flag. But basically, if you go to Chrome flags, you can just turn it on, restart your browser, and this will work. And this is where, it's some of the stuff with web standards, it gets tricky because it's not like product development where you go, we're shipping in November, and we're going to work weekends and get it done. With web standards, it's like, well, when the Google folks decide to turn on that flag, that's when it's going to be out. I can't tell you if it's next week or the spring. But a major influential factor on when that gets turned on is all of you. Right? The more you use it and go, God, how could the web exist without that? And here are these great examples, and we see use cases, and some of them are very practical use cases, then it drives adoption, and especially when it's on every other browser. Well, there's one browser that's missing here. Wonder which one. Yeah. All right, so let's switch gears a little bit. SVG, most of you, I seem to remember, raised your hands. You know what SVG is, scalable vector graphics. Making a very big resurgence. I was doing SVG, I think in 2001. And then Flex came along, and good stuff like that. But so for those of you not as familiar, just to like the basics, SVG lets you do XML markup and to define, rectangles, circles, ellipses, what have you, and then define interactive multimedia, and you can script, and you can even apply CSS styling whenever, and everything scales infinitely beautifully. It's great. So those, just basic components, but you can create some very complex graphics with SVG. But we're not going to actually draw anything with SVG directly. Well, you'll see. So just to give you an idea, SVG itself has been around since '98, but it wasn't until 2011 that IE supported it. And that was kind of like we had it on iOS, we had it on Android, we had it on IE, and in the past 2 years it's kind of gone gangbusters, showing up in a lot of different places. And even in Illustrator, which can be used to generate SVG, and there's other tools as well, they just released some updates that vastly improve the SVG generation and everything. If you want to put SVG on your page, you can do just an object tag or an iframe, or you can have it be the source of an image, or you can embed SVG directly in your site. But what we're talking about here is defining filters within your SVG. And the first one is blend. And blend itself, that filter, is like the blends that we were showing earlier. So you can have these filters within your SVG that can manipulate the display of other SVG components. So you can have, a rectangle that gets blurred or what have you, and you can have two components that get blended together. Color matrix, so as it says, you can define this matrix and change the colors based off this matrix. I'm going to leave component transfer. I'm going to be talking about that a bit, but they're all some combination of like composite, allow you to blend things together in a certain complex way. Convolve matrix. Anyone ever heard of convolution? Anyone ever do any image processing? You can do edge detection on your images and whatnot. And so there's a whole bunch of these great primitives. And a filter consists of multiple primitives, and you kind of define a flow of the output of this filter feeds into the input of this one, and you just, it looks pretty complex there, but it's pretty straightforward. Just when you define a filter primitive, you can just name the output, and then another filter primitive, you can name the input. So this little example here, we start off with this little star, but we feed it in, and if you look, do I have a mouse? I need a mouse pointer. But you'll see so we feed in the source image. The alpha channel gets fed into a blur filter. And then one output of that goes into this offset filter. Well, what happens if we just take the alpha channel, which just basically is a black with the transparency. It's a black image with the proper transparency setup. If you blur it just around the image and then you offset it, you've got a shadow. So you take the shadow, take another path, takes that blur, and then lights it, applies lighting calculations, and then merges it with the original image. Now you've got a lit image, and then you add that together with the drop shadow, and boom, that's the output. And that was actually literally screenshots I took of, with and without the filter in a web page. So if you want to apply the filters to your SVG, you can define a filter element right in the SVG itself. And each filter, there's a filter spec. It can show you there's whatever there were, 25 different filters or so, filter primitives. I'm not going to go through the definition here, stand up here and tell you the definition of each one. But you define a filter, and then within the filter will be the filter primitives. And then on any graphics component, or you could say a circle, an arc, what have you, or just G, which lets you group graphic primitives, you can just say the filter is, the URL is this filter, and point it to that filter. Or you can put CSS styling directly in your SVG, or you can even have CSS outside of the SVG that says that, look at that, CSS style says any G element uses that filter, and it's referencing an element, my filter, in the SVG. So hopefully that makes sense. You can do it any of those ways, whichever is most. I like the third way personally, but if you need the CSS within the SVG as one big component, then you can do that. So I always prefer the pictures. So this is a code pen I have where we were showing these primitives earlier. And notice as I mouse over them, right, that's the, there it is. So what have I done here? Let's get rid of the JavaScript. So I just say on hover, set that filter. Right? But here's my SVG. I've defined a filter called Light It Up. And it's doing the Gaussian blur and the offset, just like that flowchart I was showing you. Specular lighting. And you can even see here the Gaussian blur. The result is blur. And the offset, its input is blur. So that's how you define the flow of these filter primitives. And then I have my graphic element with the rectangle and a rounded rectangle. Those are the rounded corners, RX, a circle. Right? So I just define all those, and I just say anything of class shape, when you hover over it, apply that filter. And that's it. Pretty straightforward. And we can, kind of like this, we do there. So now they all have it. And you can even, so the Gaussian blur, for instance. So ignore, if you don't know standard deviation, don't worry about it. But that's just how much of the blur. And that's just a uniform blur, but actually we can give it a two-dimensional blur. Right? And we can say, here, blur it horizontally, 6, and vertically 1. And so you can kind of give it a kind of a movement, or we can reverse the order of that. Right? So like the following. So, you could build some beautiful buttons like this, do some great stuff as you hover over it, click, and and now that it's getting adopted everywhere, there's a lot of power here. All right, so far so good. So the best thing is, you go, okay, that SVG is great and everything. I'm not sure how I'm going to author content in SVG yet, doesn't really fit in our workflows and everything. But those filters, those are cool. So now you can apply SVG filters to HTML content. And when I first heard that, I couldn't quite believe that. I was playing around with it, and it works. So you can say, here, I've got a div. It's classes, my class, and whatever's in there. Any HTML DOM element, just give it your CSS selector and apply the filter, and that's referencing a filter within my SVG. That's all you have to do. It's pretty straightforward. So you still have to define the SVG, and you can embed some SVG in your code and have it filter, and then just reference it. So this is so this is a page I put together. If you look on the left, it's just div, span, normal. That's this right here with an image. And I just did this over and over and over and over, the same image. And then I defined some filters. And I was trying to figure out some filters that were combinations of existing filters to do some more useful tasks. But the CSS, somewhere here, I just say anything of class edge detect, apply that filter. The difference here is if it's just in the SVG, if you're applying SVG filters to SVG, then you just need to apply a filter CSS attribute. If you're applying it to HTML, then depending on the browser, there's a prefix. So like in Chrome, you need WebKit filter. Eventually, Chrome is, Chrome is based on Blink, for those of you who know, and they're getting, their goal is to get rid of all the prefixes, and so that should just work on Chrome ultimately. But right now, to get that working, you need the WebKit filter, and you need that also for iOS 7 Safari, and I'm assuming for Maverick Safari. However, I have an image. I'm doing edge detection in the browser. I'm doing a Gaussian blur, like looking, giving a feeling of movement, of motion, sharpening up my images, embossing it. This luminance mask looks at the alpha channel, the transparency channel on your image. And I'm saying image just because it was easier to show it off with image, but it's just HTML, right? You can do whatever you want. But it looks at the alpha channel and basically, I forget how this works, but it basically hides it or shows it based on, it creates like a black and white image. So what that blue that you're seeing through here is, that's what it is, sorry. The brighter the image, the more opaque it is. The darker the image, more transparent it is. So where that's the original image, all this bright ground here, is you can see the image, but where it's darker, the blue background is showing through. So you got to think of, well, what could I do with that? Posterizing it, gradient maps, grayscale, X-rays. I just made it black and white and inverted it. One of the other evangelists was like, every time I do a presentation, the screen is always washed out. So I want to take my slides and I want to figure out what my slide deck's going to look like on the screen when it's displayed on some washed out screen. Yeah, this is a nice display. So I was like, okay, how about if I create a washout filter? And so you could just apply it to your presentation and see what it looks like. It's kind of fun. All right, so this is where it's supported, which is, it's not bad. I mean, you can do this you can do it on your iPhone, you can do it on your iPad. WebKit Nightly works in Firefox, works in Chrome, works in Opera. There's that other one. What's it called? It's missing. What's that? Someone say Android. I don't think so. I'm not sure what the state of that is. So I said I was going to come back to this component transfer filter. This is a hard one to get your head around, but it's incredibly powerful. Any designers in the audience? All right. You ever use the gradient map layer in Photoshop? So it's related to that. We're going there. So the component transfer filter says, if you take all 4 channels of an image, red, green, blue, and alpha, individually I can remap the colors. or remap the values in the channel. All right. So this component transfer filter has a red transfer function, 0, 1, 0. And what that means is, so normally red is going to go from black. The red channel, a red of 0 is going to be black, and a red of 1 or 255 is going to be full red. But 0, 1, 0 says, all right, let's take that span and make the first number at the left edge of that gradient, and the last number is at the right end, and then just make even stops along the way. And so if you look at the bottom, what that means is I want the 0, 1, 0 means at the left edge of the gradient, its value should be 0. In the middle, it should be a red value of 1, which is full red, and at the right edge, it should be 0. So any images that are fully red are going to become black, but if they're half red, they're going to be red, which is crazy, but you can do some crazy things in combinations with the different channels and even the alpha channels. And I was looking at this and I went, wow, that's really powerful and really confusing. That was designed by some serious engineers, not for use by a designer to do anything practical with, but I bet you could do something really cool with that. What's that?
Not the first time that happened.
Yeah. So, and there's a treasure trove of stuff in SVG of really powerful, really complicated stuff that once you get your head around, fantastic. So I started looking at Photoshop and looking at different things. You know, I've been sort of in this quest to see what kind of things can we already do on the web that people don't even realize you can do. So I thought, okay, well, what if I took that notion of the gradient map layer in Photoshop, which lets you take a gradient, like like you can have CSS, you can have linear gradients. Something goes from red to blue, or red to green to blue to white, whatever. And you can define a gradient, and then you can map an image. You can take that gradient and remap the colors. So if you think of a gradient, the left edge would be black, and the right edge would be white, and let's just remap it. So what if I could take my content on the screen, apply a grayscale filter to it, so now my content goes from black to white, and anything black would be the left edge of this gradient that I could define somehow with a component transfer filter, and the right end would be the right edge. Have I completely lost everybody? I'm going to show you. So I took this and went off to a very weird place in my head and wrote gradient maps.js. And it's a JavaScript library, and it's available on GitHub. You can go use it. And under the covers, all you do is you just say, you include gradient maps.js, and then you say, apply a gradient map to some element, any element on the page, and you give it a linear gradient. And it's the same format as a CSS gradient. So just find the docs for CSS gradient. And actually on the GitHub page, I show how to do it. But you just pass in a string that is the gradient, and it'll do it. It'll insert a little bit of SVG with the filter and apply it, and it'll do the whole thing for you. So, so let's take a look at what you could do with this. And say a little prayer to the network gods. Good. All right. That's pretty good. All right, stop that. All right, let's play this little video. All right, and you can see here, this is a gradient we're going to apply. Let's play this gradient. All right, cool. So there's a gradient. All right, and I just applied it to this iframe, and the iframe is pointing to this video. Here, let's do black and white. Black and white, but let's raise the midtone, or let's darken the midtones just a little bit, right? So it's, and all I've done, if you look at the gradient, starts there, it's an even black to white, and then we kind of make it a little more, oh, let's get that going again. All right, high contrast black and white. X-ray, I like this, double black and white. I like the cars down there. Sepia, sunset, icy. So, so I'm taking live, not live, but I'm taking video, and just remapping the colors. I could, I could take the here, not working. All right. So I just loaded the Adobe web page and just remapped all the colors on it. And, it's one line of JavaScript. There, right? And that's fully interactive website. So, so now you're doing like Photoshop gradient map layers in a web page on any HTML element. And I showed you where it was all supported. So it's good. It's good stuff. So then I started thinking, okay, well, that's really cool. And like I was saying at the beginning, I want to think of some practical use cases of this. So can you guys see that shirt? The contrast is a little hard. But we've got a white shirt, just an image of a shirt. Let's pick a different color. We're selling shirts. They come in 65 million colors. Right? So, and notice it's not just a red shirt or a green shirt. It's all shaded and everything because all the shading is there, and I'm just applying a gradient map. So what I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, whatever color you pick, make a gradient map, make a linear gradient that goes from black to that color, and just apply it. Boom, one line. And in fact, if we go here, get rid of that. It really is that easy. There's the form with an image. There's my CSS, and I just say when the input changes, get its value and apply gradient map from black to that color. That's it. All right, that's a pretty easy page with some pretty powerful implications. All right, how are we doing? Oh, perfect. Okay. So I've shown you how you can blend things within canvases, and then SVG, for working on SVG content, we can manipulate the SVG content using these filters. We can take that SVG filter and apply it to HTML content. But there's also CSS filters. And these are filters, IE had them for years, and then they kind of went by the wayside, and but there's now this web standard for CSS filters, and there's a set of built-in filters, and these are just in the browser. They're standard filters. They're parameterized, so you can just say I want it to be sepia this much, 100% sepia or 50% sepia, or blur it 3 pixels. So we can do things like this. And this is actually, kind of surprising, because you think, well, wait a minute, that's not just a blur, but you can combine the filters, and you can have the output of one feeding into the next, right? This is the whole concept with the filters. Feed, and just kind of remanipulate. So we can say, right, let's just make it black and white. Let's make it sepia tone, saturate, old style, that's kind of weird. All right. And all I'm doing when I click the button is I'm just changing the CSS, saying, just use that filter. This is not JavaScript. The JavaScript is handling the button click, but that's it. So it's just CSS, so it all gets hardware accelerated. Everything's great. You can do some really creative stuff with this. And I'll do this later. It works here. It works on my phone, iOS 5, iOS 6. Safari works fine. This website works just fine. So then I thought, this is in my quest to think, what can we? I don't know why I just have this bee in my bonnet about stuff that you can do in Photoshop that do on the web. So I thought, well, we have this whole notion of layers in Photoshop, and you can layer, effects on top of each other and have something blurring or clipping or doing all these things. And I thought, well, we have divs on the web. Maybe we can do something similar. So, So here's an image of some jets. This Italian show jet team, and so they have different colored smoke and everything, very nice. And so what I did here is I have two divs actually, and once again, it's just easier with images to be able to show off what's going on here. But the div is actually duplicated, so the image is on top of each other. And the bottom, the background div is just there. The front one has a gradient map applied to it. So this slider lets me control the opacity of the front layer. All right, so we go here and we just go there. All right, that's the front layer. It's fully opaque. We're looking at, I've just remapped the colors of just using my gradient maps JS library. But that's just, looking at that, that's a little too weird, that picture. But maybe we can tone it down and just do something a little more real, but maybe more surreal. All right, so we can go from fully nothing to that. So I'm using transparency, the opacity on the front layer to show the background through, and combine so you can control how much of the gradient map to apply. Perhaps a better effect here is a soft blur. So same thing. Here's that image of Tower Bridge in London, and layer 2 I've applied a blur, a 5-pixel blur to it, but it's fully transparent, so I don't see the front layer. But if I change the transparency, there's a blurred image. That's not very useful, but it's it can be. So nice blurred image, but the effect I was trying to get is a soft blur. Like you're sort of looking at someone's image. They're not just blurry, you can see their details, but it's just like a nice soft blur. So let's change that to 0.7, let's say. Right? So, yeah, it's better at 7. Right? Can you guys see that from the back? That sort of soft blur effect? All right, so what's happening is you have the blur, but then the sharp edges are showing through. So you still get the definition of the image, but it's got this like little bit of cheesecloth over the lens effect. So there's a lot of creative possibilities here, and I encourage you all to play with this and come up with some other great ideas. The built-in filters I showed you, you can just parameterize them, but then you go, okay, but that's not enough. I want to create my own filters. And that's where CSS custom filters comes in. So there's all the built-in filters, and one of them is custom. And you can actually write your own shader, and I will say it's some pretty heavy programming to do. It's not the easiest thing to do, but the beautiful part of it is if you get someone to write a shader for you, then you can just use it and reuse it. It's just a component you can drop in. So this is using a crumple filter. All right, that's just CSS. That's an image with a CSS animation on the WebKit filter, setting a custom filter to point to the crumple animation. So there's no JavaScript. It's not Canvas. So if you think about, we started the talk with talking about all the great things you can do with a Canvas, and you can do WebGL and great programming and cool stuff, but you're confined to that canvas. This is on the DOM, right? Just go to town on anything in your HTML. Like I said, I'm using images because it's just easier to show what's going on, but we can do some nice stuff with this. So the custom filters have two components to them. These vertex shaders and fragment shaders. And anybody use OpenGL or WebGL or maybe a little bit? Yeah, the concept maybe you've heard. The shader is just a function, right? It's just a function call. The vertex shader says, okay, I'm going to specify a grid that I'm going to lay over my web page, or that DOM element to which I'm applying the shader or the custom filter. You specify the grid resolution, 4 by 5, 20 by 20, whatever, and the vertex shader is going to get called at every vertex point. And your function can then use this 3D library to move that point in 3 dimensions. So you can actually take what's being rendered onto the screen and just manipulate it in 3D. Right? So all that's doing is tweaking it. So you see the right image, it's the same image, kind of tweaked. The fragment shader says, I'm going to be called for every pixel, and I can remap the colors. So if you're thinking about this, well, if I want to light something, I need my vertex shader to tell my fragment shader, well, how have I remapped this in 3D so that I can apply the proper lighting? And there's some variables that can be passed between the shaders and interpolated between grid points and everything, so that you can say, we're on this slope, and this is the current slope, and then the fragment shader says, I know how to light that. And so you can remap the colors, and so you end up with this crumpled lit flower. That's what it looks like. It's kind of nice, but you do have to have some understanding of 3D math. But this vertex shader doesn't really do anything. That particular one just says the position is whatever the position that the browser passed me in, multiply it times this projection matrix. We're not going to spend a lot of time here, but this was a filter that I wrote for, I wanted to do some masking. So I wrote, it was a filter that you could specify a circle and punch a transparent circle through any of your content to what's ever behind it. So, you can set the opacity on a DOM element, but I can't set the shape of that opacity. It's the whole DOM element. So what if I could specify a circle, and then, but I don't want hard edges. I want to feather the edges to kind of blend it, and that's where we don't need to go into all the math here, but it's, at the end of the day, what you are figuring out is this color matrix. And that color matrix just gets multiplied times the current color. And anybody who's done any, if you remember matrix multiplication or anything, don't worry about it if you don't. What's going to happen there is the color is going to stay the same, except the transparency is going to be multiplied times that transparency value. So it's just going to manipulate the transparency. Don't worry about it. There were some security issues that it turns out people figured out in WebGL, that you could write these shaders. I still don't quite understand how this works, but you could write a shader that, depending on the timing of it, you could actually reverse engineer, figure out what the content is. So if there's some third-party script that's putting up a filter over your content that you don't even know is there, but it's just processing your content and figuring out your bank account number somehow. It doesn't matter how it works. The fact is, there are people who have proven that it works. And so we had to restrict the custom filters. The fragment shader, you can't read the color pixel. Right? So you can't say, if it's red, make it blue. But you can transform the color. You can say, make it half as bright. And you can do matrix multiplication. You can apply a transformation. You can't read the value and then make decisions off it, which restricts some of the things that you can do. There's certain effects that you want to do and you just can't do because it requires reading the value and making decisions. But I don't know if you guys can read that image. It's a little hard to read here. But so there's, in the fragment shader, you can figure out, you can calculate a CSS color matrix, which by default is just an identity matrix, does nothing, and it's multiplied with the destination. And it produces this color. But then there's also this blend color. Is that what it is? Yeah, the mix color, sorry. And the mix color, so you can specify either or both. The mix color gets blended with the result using the blend operations that we started this with, multiply, darken, dodge, all these things. And so you can do some pretty complicated color mixing and blending operations. And then, the result is put on the screen using compositing, and but you can specify different kinds of compositing, different kinds of blending. I usually don't, by that time, I'm usually so confused and just leave it at the defaults. But the creative possibilities are there. So, what was, yeah, so this, are we good for time? Oh, yeah, we're gonna have to wrap it up. So this is not working. Right. There we go. So this is just a filter that's, as you can see, it's doing these swipes, breaking it up into 3 things, and the colors that it's using is based on different blend modes. So it's using that, it's calculating a mix color, doing different blending operations in combination with this custom filter that's splitting up your image into 3 strips and what have you. So let's just move quick. And so we have this filter lab that lets you work with all these. So these are the built-in filters, right? And you can see the CSS at the bottom here, right? That it's showing you, that's how you would define that blur. You can do animations, we can add combinations, you know, let's do that. And so you can apply all the basic built-in filters, and it just lets you play with it. Just look for CSS Filter Lab, or it's off html.adobe.com. You'll see, you can come to this filter lab, you can just play with it. But you can also use all these custom filters. So this is actually one that I wrote. Because I was at this website, it was an IBM site, and suddenly the page split apart, like curtains. I was like, wow, how did they do that? And then I realized they just totally faked it out, and as the curtains were pulling away, it was a completely different image. It wasn't the image that was on the screen. I thought it was one. But this is the image, right? So let's take that. That's my image. And I'm just applying some curtains, and I can control the number of folds, right? It's crazy, and it's, you know, you can, it's 3D, right? We can do that. And that is just, look, I'm selecting the text, right? It's just HTML. So, you know, accessibility still works. Screen readers will still work with, and I'm reading off curtains. I mean, it's crazy. But you could have another div in the back, right? So you could show your web page, and then when they click, just have it go and expose what's behind it. There's possibilities are endless with that. This is here the oh here. So the filter lab lets you actually go in and edit the code. This is here's the here we are. Let's make that smaller. That was the one I was talking about before, the filter that I showed you the code. So the white you're seeing is actually just punching a transparent hole through the image. And let's make it not quite as, there, semi-transparent. Right? Let's make it a hard edge, feather the edge, right? And we can go into any of these and edit it. And here's, you can look at the vertex shader, the fragment shader. You can write your own. You can take an existing one and just say fork it within the filter lab, play with it, tweak it, and then you can even publish it to GitHub, and it'll create a gist for you that you can then share to someone else. They can import it in, or someone else can give you a URL. You can just load it in, play with them. It's a lot of fun. And that's the best way to learn and play with them, how they work. All right. I don't think we have enough time, but people want to come up after. I'm happy to show you. You know, with all of our Creative Cloud apps at Adobe, Reflow, which is for responsive design, and Animate, HTML, JavaScript animation, they now support filters. So you can animate, you know, having something blur and then get clear off the screen, or do any of these filters and just animate them. So finally, I just want to reiterate, please, there's a lot of fun stuff here. Go off, play with it. If you have questions, certainly let me know. I'm going to leave my contact info at the end. I want to hear if people create good stuff. But more than anything, some of it, like the custom filters, is like, okay, so what are some good use cases? So that we can really identify the use cases and talk to the browser vendors, right? We're not a browser vendor at Adobe. We're saying, look, this is great stuff. But then, you have people who go, well, it's just pretty pictures, but we really shouldn't, I don't know if we want to load down our browser with this. But when you guys are creating other stuff and going, no, look at this great stuff. I didn't show you in that thing with the sequoias, giant sequoias. There's a page, there's a page curl, and there's all kinds of great stuff that you can do. So I encourage you all, go out, play with it, have fun with it. It's a ton of fun to use any of this stuff. And thank you very much.